My sister stole my $12,000 designer wedding dress 2 days before my big day. Mom said, "You're not even pretty. She needs it more for her Instagram clout." Dad nodded. "Don't be selfish. We'll buy you a cheap one." I smiled and said, "Keep it." On her wedding day, she stepped on the aisle and the fabric started to dissolve. I called the police for theft. The room went dead silent. My name is Nadia Calloway. I am 29 years old. Last Saturday, I got married. It was the most beautiful day of my life. I walked down the aisle in the most perfect dress I have ever worn. My husband looked at me like I was the only person in the room. 200 people stood up when I entered. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, unreservedly seen. That dress was not the dress I spent 3 years saving for. The dress I spent 3 years saving for $12,000. 26 months of $460 set aside every single month. That dress was on my younger sister. And by the time my ceremony began, it was dissolving off her body in front of 200 guests and a live camera. I called the police. The room went absolutely silent. And then I walked down the aisle and married the love of my life. Before I tell you everything, and I mean everything, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if this story is already sitting somewhere in your chest. Only if you already feel something, because I think you do. Drop your location and your local time in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you are watching this tonight. Okay, let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house in Greenfield, Indiana. Population 42,000, the kind of suburb where every lawn is mowed on Saturday morning, and every family looks completely normal from the outside. My father, Robert Calloway, is 60 years old. He works in insurance. He loves golf. He loves quiet. He has loved quiet for as long as I can remember. And he has protected that quiet by agreeing with every single thing my mother has ever said. In 31 years of marriage, I have never once heard Robert Calloway say the words, "That is not right." My mother, Diane Calloway, is 57. She ran the house like a project manager runs a budget, allocating attention, praise, investment, and energy, according to a system she designed before I was old enough to understand it. My younger sister, Brianna, is 25 years old. She has 84,000 Instagram followers in the lifestyle and fashion space. She has never paid rent. She has never held a job longer than 8 months. She has never, in her entire adult life, bought anything significant with her own money. But she photographs beautifully, and in my mother's hierarchy, that counts for everything. And then there is me, Nadia, the older one, the steady one, the invisible one. I want to be precise about what invisible means in a family like mine, because it is not the kind of invisible that comes from neglect. I was fed. I was clothed. I went to school. My parents showed up at parent-teacher conferences. On paper, nothing was wrong. But there is a specific kind of erasure that happens when you grow up as the second priority in someone's heart, and they are not quiet about which child comes first. Brianna's school portraits lined the hallway from the entrance to the kitchen. All 7 years of them, framed, labeled, hung at eye level. My portraits went into a drawer. Brianna got the lead in the school play in 7th grade, and my mother threw a dinner party to celebrate. When I was accepted to the State Honor Society that same month, my mother said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to planning the menu. In high school, when Brianna started getting photographed for local brand partnerships, small stuff, nothing significant, Diane printed those photos and framed them in the living room. She referred to Brianna, in front of guests, as our star. I was not the star. I was the infrastructure. I was the one who made sure the holiday decorations came down, who remembered to send the birthday cards, who organized the family calendar. I was load-bearing and invisible, and I think for a very long time I told myself that was enough. It wasn't enough, but I didn't know how to say that yet. What I did instead was leave. At 22, I moved to Chicago, got a job as a junior project coordinator at an urban planning firm, found a 1-bedroom apartment that was entirely mine, hung nothing on the walls for 3 months because I could not believe I was allowed to choose what went there. I went home for Christmas every year. I kept the peace. I passed the potatoes and smiled at the right moments and told myself that it wasn't that bad, that I was being too sensitive, that the past was the past. I was not being too sensitive. The past was not the past, but I had not yet learned to trust my own read of the room. That would come later. It came with a man named Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb is 31 years old. He is a structural engineer. He builds things that are designed to hold weight without collapsing bridges, foundations, load-bearing systems, and I think that is not entirely a coincidence. We met at a work conference in 2021. He was presenting on community infrastructure and I was attending on behalf of my firm. He is not flashy. He does not perform. He is the kind of person who, when he asks you a question, actually waits for the answer. On our 4th date, he asked me about my family. I gave him the short version: younger sister, parents in Indiana. We're close. Everything is fine. The version I had polished into something presentable. He looked at me for a moment and said, "That sounds like a version of the story. What's the real one?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. I cried for 45 minutes at a very nice restaurant, and he did not look uncomfortable once. He listened to everything, and when I was done, he said, "I think you've been very kind to people who have not been very kind to you. And I think you've mistaken that kindness for a personality trait when it's actually just a survival mechanism." I went home that night and could not sleep. Not because I was upset, because something had been named for the first time. And once a thing is named, you cannot unknow it. We were engaged 14 months later. In our apartment, no audience, no performance. He got down on one knee in the kitchen while I was making coffee and said, "I want to spend my life choosing you on purpose. Will you let me?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. The first thing I did before the venue, before the flowers, before a single vendor call, was decide on the dress. I need to explain the dress properly, because if you only hear $12,000, you will think this is a story about money. It is not a story about money. It is a story about a woman who was told, in 1,000 small ways across 23 years, that beauty was her sister's department, that visibility was not for her, that she was the background, functional, necessary, but not worth looking at, and the dress was the first time in my life I decided that was not true. I started saving in January of 2022. $460 every month, automatically transferred to a separate account I called, and I am not embarrassed to tell you this, the Finally Fund, because that was what it felt like. Finally, 26 months later, I had $12,000. I had done my research. I had found a bridal designer in Chicago named Elena Vasquez. She runs a small atelier in the West Loop. 8 years in business, a waiting list. She has dressed women for their second marriages, their elopements, their courthouse ceremonies, and their cathedral processions. She is the kind of designer who, when you sit down in her studio, asks you not what you want the dress to look like, but what you want to feel like when you walk in. I said, "I want to feel like the most beautiful person in the room. Not for anyone else, just for myself. Just once." Elena was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I can do that. Let's get started." The design took 4 weeks. Ivory silk charmeuse. Minimal embroidery at the bodice, small, hand-stitched flowers that Elena sourced from a craftsman in Lyon, France. A cathedral train, 4 feet of pure silk that moved like water when you walked. Simple, flawless, completely mine. I had 3 fittings. At the second fitting, I stood on the platform in Elena's studio and looked in the mirror and I cried. Not from sadness, from something I did not have a word for at the time. Elena handed me a tissue and said, "That reaction is the whole point of what I do." After the fitting, she walked me out and said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "Nadia, I have made dresses for a lot of women over a lot of years. Some of them want to be seen. Some of them want to impress. You're different. You just want to be real. And that is the most beautiful thing to dress." I drove home and sat in my car for 20 minutes in the parking garage. The dress was finished in October. Elena delivered it in a custom garment bag with my name stitched on the outside. I hung it in the second bedroom of our apartment, the room we'd set aside as a staging area for wedding preparations, and I looked at it every morning for 6 weeks before the wedding. Marcus saw it once. He stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment, and then looked at me and said, "You are going to be extraordinary." That was the dress. That is what my sister took. The weekend before the wedding, Marcus and I hosted a pre-wedding gathering at our apartment. His family, my family, our closest friends. Nothing formal, just dinner, drinks, the kind of easy celebration that the week before a wedding is supposed to feel like. My parents arrived Friday afternoon. Brianna arrived that evening with 2 suitcases, a ring light, and a portable tripod she carried through our front door like it was standard luggage. I should have noticed the ring light. I didn't. Saturday morning I woke up at 7. The apartment was quiet. Marcus was still asleep. I padded down the hall to do what I had been doing every morning for 6 weeks. Walk past the second bedroom door and feel, for just a moment, completely calm about everything that was coming. The door was open. I pushed it wider. The garment bag was on the floor, unzipped. The hanger was there. The dress was not. I stood in the doorway for what felt like a very long time. My first thought was not anger. My first thought was, that's strange. My brain genuinely could not process what I was seeing because my brain genuinely could not believe that this was something that would happen. I walked to the kitchen. Brianna was at the kitchen island, phone in one hand, cup of my coffee in the other. My dress, my ivory silk cathedral train custom $12,000 dress, was on a mannequin in the corner of my kitchen. Her ring light was set up at a 45-degree angle. There was a reflector propped against the refrigerator. She was writing an Instagram caption. She looked up when I walked in. She smiled. The smile of someone who has never once in their life considered that what they are doing might not be acceptable. "Morning. This dress is absolutely insane. Elena Vasquez is unreal. I'm going to tag her. Do you have her handle?" I looked at the dress. I looked at Brianna. I looked at the ring light. I said, "That is my wedding dress. I need you to put it back." She waved her hand. "I'm just borrowing it for content. I'll give it back after. I just need a few shots. The lighting in here is actually perfect." After what? After the wedding, I thought I could wear it to the ceremony. As a guest, it photographs so well, and I have a brand deal with Brianna. That is my wedding dress. You are not wearing my wedding dress to my wedding. She looked at me the way she has looked at me our entire lives, not with malice, but with the mild impatience of someone who finds your objections slightly inconvenient. "You'll be in your own photos. Nobody's going to be looking at me." And then my mother walked into the kitchen. She looked at the dress. She looked at Brianna. She looked at me. And she made her assessment in approximately 4 seconds. "Nadia, she just wants to borrow it for a few photos." "Mom, it is my wedding dress. I am getting married in 2 days." My mother tilted her head. She did this thing she has always done, a slight tilt, a slight pause just before she says something that rewrites reality. "You're not even that pretty, Nadia. Brianna needs this. Her Instagram is her livelihood. This could be a real opportunity for her." My father walked in from the living room, coffee in hand. My mother turned to him. He looked at the dress. He looked at me. He nodded once. "Don't be selfish, Nadia. We'll take you to the bridal shop before the ceremony. We'll find you something nice. Something that works. Something that works." I stood in my own kitchen, in my own apartment, 2 days before my wedding, holding my empty garment bag, 26 months of savings, 3 fittings, a designer who told me I was worth dressing, a dress that was the first beautiful thing I had ever let myself have. And my family stood in a semicircle around me and told me, with complete confidence, that it belonged to my sister more than it belonged to me. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at Brianna, who had already turned back to her phone. And I smiled. I said, "Keep it." I turned around. I walked upstairs. I closed the door to our bedroom, and I made 3 phone calls. The first call was to Elena Vasquez. It was 8:47 the morning. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened. There was a pause on her end. And then she said, "I was wondering when you were going to call." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I have been making wedding dresses for 8 years. I have seen families. I thought there was a chance something like this might happen, so I made you a second dress." A second dress. She had made me a second dress, without telling me, without charging me. A backup gown she had constructed quietly in the final weeks before delivery, simpler in design, equally beautiful. Ivory crepe with clean lines and a shorter train. She had called it in her notes, the contingency. She said she made one every few years, when a bride's family gave her a feeling she couldn't quite articulate. I drove to her atelier at 10 in the morning. I tried on the contingency dress. I stood on the same platform where I had stood 3 months earlier, and I looked in the mirror. Elena stood behind me. She said, "What do you think?" I said, "I think it's even more beautiful than the first one." She smiled. She said, "That is because you are standing differently. You are standing like a woman who has already made her decision." She charged me nothing for it. I tried. She refused. She said, "This one is a gift. Consider it the cost of doing business with people I actually believe in." The second call was to my lawyer, an old friend from university named James Alcott, who now practices civil and property law in Chicago. I had already documented the timeline that morning, photographs of the empty garment bag, the hanger, the dress on the mannequin in my kitchen, Brianna's ring light set up. I had receipts for the dress going back to the initial deposit. I had Elena's records, the fitting appointments, the delivery confirmation. James said, "You have a clean theft case. The dress was in your home, in your possession, removed without your consent. Her intent to wear it further establishes possession. Do you want to file a report?" I said yes. We filed a police report that evening. 2 officers from the district took my statement, reviewed the documentation, and confirmed the matter was actionable. They would be available the following morning if I needed them on site. I asked them if they could be at the venue by 10 a.m. They said yes. The third call was to Marcus. He was in the bedroom when I knocked. I sat down on the edge of the bed and told him everything. The dress, the kitchen, my mother's words, the 3 calls I had just made. I told him about Elena's backup dress. I told him about the police report. I told him what I planned to do. He listened to all of it. When I finished, he said 4 words. "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to coordinate with the venue's head of security tomorrow morning without telling anyone else. I need Brianna to arrive in the original dress, and I need us to enter the ceremony exactly on time." He nodded. He pulled out his phone. He said, "I'll call the venue now." That night, after the pre-wedding gathering wound down and my family went to bed, Brianna posted 2 Instagram stories from the kitchen wearing my dress, the ring light casting everything in that golden, sponsored, content warmth. I went back to the second bedroom. I looked at the empty mannequin. I looked at the unzipped garment bag. And I did the last thing I needed to do. I have a background in textile science, a summer internship during my second year of university at a materials lab that worked with theatrical costuming, sustainable fabrics, and experimental textile compounds. I know things about fabric that most people do not know. One of the things I know is that certain water-activated, dissolvable compounds used in theatrical quick-change costuming and textile degradation testing are non-toxic, colorless, odorless, and invisible to the naked eye until activated by sustained heat and moisture. They are also legal to purchase, legal to possess, and leave no trace on the fabric itself until the activation conditions are met. I am not going to tell you exactly where I purchased it, or the precise compound name. What I will tell you is that the application was careful, measured, and targeted specifically to the external seam binding and the outer decorative panels, the parts that would be most visible. The inner structural panels and the foundation of the dress were left untreated. Activation time under normal body heat and movement, 2 to 3 hours. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11 a.m. Brianna had told our mother she wanted to arrive early for photos. I went to bed at midnight. I slept better than I had in weeks. I woke up at 6:30 on the morning of my wedding. Marcus was already awake. He had coffee ready. He looked at me across the kitchen and said, "Today is going to be the best day of your life." I said, "I know." We arrived at the venue, the Ashbridge Estate, a renovated historic property 40 minutes outside the city at 8:30, entering through the side entrance, away from the main arrival area. My two closest friends, Priya and Keely, were already there. Elena arrived at 9 with the contingency dress in a garment bag that had no name on the outside. We went to the bridal suite on the second floor. I got dressed. Elena did final adjustments. Priya did my hair. Keely handled everything else with the efficient calm of a woman who has been my best friend for 11 years and was not remotely surprised by any part of this plan. At 9:45, I checked my phone. Brianna had posted 3 Instagram stories. The first was a close-up of the embroidery at the bodice of the original dress. The caption said, "This is not mine, but it absolutely should be." The second was a full-length mirror shot in the venue lobby, taken at 8:52 a.m. 6,200 people had viewed it. The third was a video 30 seconds of her walking across the venue's outdoor terrace in the dress, the cathedral train pooling behind her on the stone. The caption said, "Yes, it's my sister's wedding dress. Yes, I'm wearing it. Yes, I look incredible." She had used our wedding hashtag. My mother had liked all 3. I put my phone face down on the dressing table. I looked at myself in the mirror. The contingency dress was ivory crepe with a clean, deep neckline and a shorter train that sat exactly right when I moved. Elena had added a detail I hadn't noticed before, a very fine line of hand stitching along the neckline, the same craftsman from Lyon. She had thought of it after my fitting. She said she woke up at 3 in the morning with the idea. It was the most beautiful I have ever looked. I thought about the other mirror, the one in Elena's studio where I had cried at my second fitting. I thought about Brianna photographing herself in my dress on my wedding hashtag. I thought about my mother saying, "You are not even that pretty." And I felt nothing about any of it. Not anger, not grief, not vindication. I felt exactly what Elena had said. I was standing like a woman who had already made her decision. 2 officers arrived at the venue security office at 10:15. Marcus met them personally. He texted me a single word: "Confirmed." I texted back, "Thank you. I love you." He texted back, "I know. See you at the end of the aisle." The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11. At 10:30, 200 guests were seated in the venue's main hall. The space was lined with white peonies and long-stemmed candles. The afternoon light came through the windows at exactly the angle Marcus and I had stood in when we chose the venue 7 months earlier. Brianna arrived in the main hall at 10:22, wearing the original dress. She had her phone out. Her sister-in-law was filming on a second device for her Instagram Live. She had told several guests, by the time I was informed, that she was doing a piece on wearing vintage couture to family events. My dress was not vintage. My mother was seated in the front left pew. She watched Brianna enter, and she smiled the way she smiled at Brianna's school plays when we were children. At 10:48, approximately 2 hours and 46 minutes after Brianna had first put on the dress at our apartment that morning, something began to happen. It started at the hemline, a subtle wavering in the outer silk panel, the way fabric behaves when its binding agents begin to release under sustained heat and pressure. Someone in the back row noticed first. A woman in a yellow dress who leaned slightly to her left and looked more carefully at the floor near Brianna's feet. Then a separation appeared along the left side seam, a vertical line, 3 inches long, where the outer decorative panel began to part from the underlining. The ivory silk of the exterior began to drape differently, loosely. Brianna felt it. She reached back and touched the left seam. The fabric gave way in her hand. The room began to go quiet. The outer bodice panel, the one with Elena's hand-stitched embroidery, began a slow, graceful, completely irreversible separation from the dress's foundation. The back of the cathedral train lost its structural support along the center seam and began to flatten. Brianna's Instagram Live was still running. 3,400 people were watching. By 10:53, Brianna was standing in the center of the main hall, in what was effectively an ivory silk slip, with deteriorating exterior panels draped around her feet. The structural foundation of the dress was intact. She was covered. She was not in any physical danger, but the $12,000 custom gown was dissolving in real time, in front of 200 wedding guests. The room was completely silent. The doors at the back of the hall opened. I walked in. Marcus had timed it to the minute. I stood at the entrance to the main hall in Elena's contingency dress. Ivory crepe, clean lines, the fine hand stitching catching the afternoon light with Priya and Keely on either side of me, and I looked at 200 people looking at me. Most of them had known by now that something was wrong. The silence was the kind that only happens when a room full of people simultaneously runs out of things to say. 2 officers came in from the side entrance. They walked directly to where Brianna was standing. My lawyer, James, was there to meet them. He had the documentation, the ownership records, the police report filed the previous evening, the time-stamped Instagram posts that established Brianna's possession of the dress in my home without my consent. One of the officers said in a voice that carried clearly in the silent room, "Miss Calloway, we need you to come with us for a moment." Brianna looked at her mother. Diane looked at the officers. Robert looked at the floor. Brianna's Instagram Live was still running. 2,800 people were watching a police officer speak to her about a theft charge while she stood in a dissolving wedding dress at her sister's wedding. The room did not make a sound. I looked at my mother. She did not look back. I turned to the officiant, a wonderful woman named Clara, who had been prepared for this possibility since Tuesday morning, and I said, "Can we begin?" She smiled. She said, "Absolutely." Marcus was standing at the end of the aisle. He had seen everything that had just happened. He had coordinated everything that had just happened. And he was standing at the end of the aisle in his gray suit, and he was looking at me with the same expression he had on our 4th date when he asked me for the real version of the story. He was not looking at what had just happened behind me. He was not looking at my mother, or the officers, or the dissolved dress on the floor. He was looking at me. I walked down the aisle. The music played. The candles were lit. The white peonies were exactly where we had placed them. 200 people minus 2 watched us get married. My mother sat in the front left pew for the entire ceremony. She did not look at me once. For the first time in my life, her not looking didn't mean anything to me at all. When Marcus and I exchanged vows, I looked at him, and I said the words I had written alone at 2 a.m. 3 weeks earlier. I have spent a long time learning the difference between people who need me and people who choose me. You choose me every single day. I will spend the rest of my life choosing you back," he cried. "He is not a man who cries easily." He cried. The officiant said, "You may kiss your spouse." 200 people minus 2 applauded. Elena was in the 3rd row. She stood first. Brianna was not arrested at the wedding. The officers took the report, confirmed the documentation, and informed Brianna and my parents that the matter was proceeding legally. They were asked to remain available for follow-up contact. They left the venue by 11:20, 2 minutes after the ceremony began. Brianna's Instagram Live clip, the unedited footage of the dress coming apart in the venue, the officers arriving, the room going silent circulated for approximately 72 hours before she took her account private. Screenshots remain. The internet remembers what people wish it wouldn't. Her following dropped from 84,000 to 61,000 in 8 days. Several brand partnerships went quiet. My mother left 3 voicemails in the week following the wedding. The first said I was vindictive and had humiliated the family. The second said I had ruined my sister's life over a dress. The third was quieter. She said she did not recognize her own daughter. She said she didn't understand when I became this way. I did not call back. My father sent a text 3 days after the wedding. It said, "Your mother is very upset." I read it. I did not respond. The civil theft claim is proceeding. My lawyer is handling it. The dress is documented at $12,000 replacement value. The claim includes replacement cost and associated damages. I do not need the money, but I will see it through, because there is a principle at stake that matters to me. The things I build should be mine. The things I save for should be mine. The beautiful things I allow myself to have after all the years of being told I was not worth having them should be mine. 2 weeks ago, Marcus and I had dinner at our oak dining table, the one we bought together at an estate sale on Maple Street. 6 chairs, slightly mismatched, ours. And I looked at him across the plates and the wine, and I thought about another table, a longer one, in a house in Indiana, where I passed the potatoes and smiled on cue. and told myself the silence was peace. This table is smaller, the plates don't match. The wine was $14. I have never felt more real in my life. If you are still here, I want to say something directly to you. If you recognize any part of what I've described, the daughter who is always the wallpaper, the sibling who takes and is never asked to give back, the parent who frames one child's photos and puts the others in a drawer, the family that tells you not to be selfish when you have the audacity to want one beautiful thing that belongs entirely to you, you are not imagining it. You are not too sensitive. You are not being dramatic. You are not selfish for wanting to be seen at your own wedding. You are not selfish for wanting to be the most beautiful person in one room, one time, on the most important day of your life. The people who tell you that you are selfish for wanting those things, those people are not protecting you. They are protecting their access to you. There is a difference, and it took me 29 years to understand it. I want to say something about my mother's words specifically, because I know some of you have heard versions of them. She said, "You are not even that pretty." She said it like a fact, like a budget line item, like she was simply allocating resources to the appropriate recipient. I want you to understand something about that kind of sentence. It is not an opinion. It is not a cruel but honest assessment. It is a tool. It is specifically designed to make you smaller so that someone else can be larger. It is designed to make you take up less space, want less, expect less, and ultimately accept less. Because if you accept less, you become easier to manage. Do not accept less. I also want to talk about my father's 4 words. We'll buy you something. There is a particular kind of enablement that wears the costume of generosity. My father offered to buy a replacement dress. He thought he was solving the problem. He was not solving the problem. He was making the problem more comfortable to live with. And that is not help, that is management. It is the management of a situation that should never have been permitted to exist in the first place. The bravest thing I ever did was not treating my dress with a textile compound and timing the police arrival to the minute. That took planning. That took knowledge. The bravest thing I ever did was standing in my own kitchen with an empty garment bag in my hands, looking at 3 people who were supposed to love me and smiling. Because that smile was not defeat. That smile was a decision. It was the decision that the next 48 hours were already handled, that I had already chosen myself. That their words, "You are not even that pretty, don't be selfish," had no place to land anymore. There was no open wound for them to fall into. I had closed it. The 2 words my family said were, "Keep it." The 2 words I needed to hear were, "You matter." They are not the same sentence, and you should not have to perform enough pain or enough sacrifice or enough invisible labor to earn the second sentence from someone who has only ever been willing to offer the first. My name is Nadia Calloway. I am 29 years old. The most valuable thing I own is not a $12,000 dress, or a civil claim proceeding in Cook County, or a title at work, or a savings account, or a cathedral train that photographs beautifully. The most valuable thing I own is the knowledge, finally, at 29, after a lifetime of being told otherwise, that I was always worth seeing. Elena Vasquez knew it from the first fitting. Marcus has known it from the beginning. And somewhere in a kitchen in Indiana, I think my grandmother knew it too. She just never had the language to say it out loud. I do. That is my story. If you made it to the end, thank you. I mean that. I read every single comment. I have a question for you, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments. Has anyone in your life ever taken something that was yours, not a dress, not an object, but your confidence, your visibility, your right to take up space, and called it sharing? Tell me. I will read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, real ones from real people who decided that enough was enough, check the description. There is a whole world of voices down there waiting for you. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.